That paid in full notice hitting my mailbox wasn't a blessing. It was the preliminary report of a homicide where the victim was my financial future. My mother didn't wire $350,000 to liberate me. She cleared the title to flip my home to a predatory speculator for quick cash to fund her escape with a conman. She banked on maternal immunity. Forgetting that as an auditor, I never let a discrepancy go unresolved. My name is Sandra Bexley, and by the time I pulled my silver sedan into the driveway of the Craftsman bungalow, I had spent the last 5 years bleeding cash to maintain. I was vibrating with the specific frequency of exhaustion that only a 10-hour shift auditing internal compliance at Stratford Vance can induce. The Seattle rain was not falling so much as it was hanging in the air, a cold, wet curtain that soaked through my wool coat the second I stepped out of the car. It was the kind of Tuesday that felt like a Thursday, gray and heavy, smelling of wet asphalt and rotting cedar. I just wanted to get inside, heat up leftover lasagna, and stare at a wall until my brain stopped crunching variances in accounts receivable. I grabbed the mail on my way up the porch steps. The metal flap of the box was cold and slick under my fingers. Usually, it was just junk mail and bills, the standard paper detritus of adult life, but today, my hand closed around something thick. It was a large, rigid envelope from my mortgage lender. My heart did a little stutter step, the kind of involuntary physical reaction an auditor gets when they see a flagged file. Thick envelopes from the bank are rarely good news. They usually mean audits, escrow shortages, or foreclosure warnings. I didn't even wait to get inside. I tucked my purse under my arm, shielding the paper from the drizzle with my body, and ripped the tab open. I pulled out a stack of crisp, high-quality bond paper. The first page was not a threat. It was a letter printed on heavy stock with a gold foil logo. "Congratulations," it said. I squinted through the rain-spattered lenses of my glasses. The text was standard corporate cheerfulness, but the words did not make sense. It stated that loan number 88392-XT had been paid in full. Attached to it was a copy of a lien release, a document that usually takes 30 years of grinding monthly payments to earn. I stood there on my porch, the damp cold seeping into my bones, and read the numbers again. The balance before this transaction had been $353,412.18. I knew that number by heart. I knew it better than I knew my own blood pressure. I tracked it on a spreadsheet every month, watching the principal drop by agonizingly small increments while the interest ate up the rest. And now, according to the piece of paper shaking in my wet hand, that number was 0. A normal person might have felt a surge of euphoria. A normal person might have thought it was a miracle, a bank error in their favor, or a secret inheritance from a long-lost uncle. But I am not a normal person. I am an auditor. In my world, numbers do not just disappear. If a liability vanishes from the balance sheet without a corresponding asset outflow, it is not a miracle. It is fraud. My stomach dropped, a sensation like missing a step on a staircase in the dark. I unlocked the front door and stumbled into the foyer, not bothering to take off my wet shoes. I dropped the mail on the entryway table and fumbled for my phone. My fingers were cold and clumsy as I tapped on my banking app. Face ID failed twice because of the raindrops on the screen before I finally punched in my passcode. I navigated to the mortgage section. Usually, it was the first thing displayed, a looming red bar reminding me of who really owned my house. It was gone. I went to the History tab. There it was. Status closed, paid in full via wire transfer. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Who pays off a mortgage for someone else? No one. The only people who pay off mortgages are the owners, or the people buying the house. A memory from 3 days ago clawed its way to the surface of my mind. It had been Sunday. My mother, Patricia, had sat at my kitchen island, the very island I was currently standing next to. She had been crying, her mascara running in jagged black lines down her cheeks. She had met a man. She said, a visionary. He was into cryptocurrency, some new coin that was going to revolutionize the logistics industry. They needed capital, just $50,000. She had begged me, clutching my hand with her manicured fingers. She promised she would pay me back double in 6 months. I had told her no. I had told her no firmly, the way I had been learning to do in therapy. I told her I did not have $50,000 liquid, which was true, and that even if I did, I would not give it to a man she had met at a seminar in a hotel ballroom. She had stopped crying instantly. The switch was terrifying. She had looked at me with dry, hard eyes and said I was selfish. She said I cared more about my spreadsheets than my own mother. Then she had left. I looked down at the paid in full letter again, $350,000. My hands were trembling, not from the cold anymore, but from a rising, acidic bile of suspicion. I dialed my mother's number. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up when she answered. "Sandra, honey." Her voice blasted through the speaker. It was jarring. 3 days ago, she had hated me. Now she sounded like she was floating on a cloud of champagne bubbles. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Where are you?" "Oh, you wouldn't believe it," she gushed. "I'm on a little retreat. I just needed to clear my head, get away from the gloom. You know how the rain gets to me." "A retreat," I repeated. "That sounds expensive." "It's a treat," she said, her voice dipping into a conspiratorial whisper. "Ken treated me. He's such a darling. We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" There was a pause, a microsecond of hesitation that only a trained ear would catch. "Life, honey, just life. Look, the reception here is spotty. I love you. I'll bring you back a souvenir." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I stood in the silence of my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the rain drumming against the window pane. I replayed her tone in my head. That wasn't the relief of someone who had found inner peace. That was the high-pitched, vibrating frequency of adrenaline. It was the sound of a gambler who had just walked away from the roulette table with a stack of chips they didn't earn. She hadn't won the lottery. And Ken, the crypto visionary, certainly hadn't paid off my mortgage out of the kindness of his heart. I looked around my living room. The crown molding I had painted myself, the hardwood floors I had refinished last summer. My mother had not paid this off to help me. You don't clear a debt unless you need the asset to be unencumbered. You pay off a lien so you can transfer the title. She was selling my house. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the vase of flowers against the wall. I went cold. I walked over to the table, picked up the letter from the bank, and laid it on the kitchen counter. I turned on the overhead lights, banishing the shadows. Then, I took my phone and began to photograph every single page, ensuring the document numbers and dates were perfectly legible. I was not a daughter anymore. I was an auditor commencing an investigation, and I was going to find every single penny. I emailed my supervisor at Stratford & Vance at 6:15 in the morning. I did not ask for permission. I simply stated that due to a critical personal financial security breach, I would be utilizing one of my accrued personal days. In my line of work, using words like security breach usually stops questions before they start. I put on my darkest charcoal suit, the one I wore when I had to deliver bad news to senior management about their expense reports, and drove straight to the main branch of my mortgage lender. The bank lobby was aggressively quiet, smelling of stale coffee and carpet cleaner. I bypassed the teller line, where 2 elderly customers were slowly counting out pennies, and walked straight to the glass-walled cubicles where the loan officers sat. I did not wait for an appointment. I found an open door with a nameplate that read Mark S., and walked in. Mark was young, perhaps 25, with the eager, slightly nervous energy of someone who had not yet been crushed by the corporate wheel. He looked up from his dual monitors, startled by my sudden entrance. I placed the letter and the lien release on his desk with a precise, heavy thud. "I need to speak with you about loan number 88392-XT. I said. I sat down before he offered a chair. Mark picked up the papers, his brow furrowing as he scanned the letterhead. He typed the loan number into his system, his keystrokes loud in the small office. After a moment, his face relaxed into a customer service smile. "Ms. Bexley, he said, turning the screen slightly toward me. I see here that this account is closed. Congratulations are in order. It looks like the full payoff was processed yesterday. Is there a problem with the recording fee? Sometimes the county is a bit slow with the paperwork, but we can certainly expedite that for you. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not return his smile. I did not authorize this transaction. I said, my voice was level, stripped of all inflection. Mark blinked. I beg your pardon, I did not pay off this loan. I repeated, articulating every syllable. I do not have $350,000 lying around. I did not request a payoff quote. I did not wire funds. This transaction is fraudulent. Mark laughed nervously. He looked around the lobby as if checking for a hidden camera. Ms. Bexley, usually when people claim fraud, it is because money was taken out of their account, not put in. Someone paid off your house. That is a pretty generous criminal act. I leaned forward. In the world of finance, Mark, an unexplained credit is just as dangerous as an unexplained debit. It is called money laundering, or in this case, a precursor to title theft. Now, I want you to pull up the transaction details. I want to know the source of funds. Mark hesitated, his smile fading. He realized I was not a confused customer he could charm. He typed in a few commands, his demeanor shifting from sales to compliance. He squinted at the screen. Okay, he said slowly. The funds came in via a federal wire transfer. It posted at 2:30 p.m. yesterday. The originator is listed as Redwood Title and Escrow. My stomach tightened. Title and escrow. That confirmed it. You do not use a title company unless you are transferring property. My mother was not just paying off the loan, she was in the middle of closing a sale. The house was likely already in escrow, and this payoff was the first step in clearing the deck so the new owner could take possession. I need to see the authorization. I said, a bank cannot just accept a third-party wire payoff without a signed request from the borrower. Show me the payoff request form. Mark looked uncomfortable. Technically, those are internal documents. I am an internal auditor for a major financial firm. Mark, do not talk to me about internal documents. If you do not show me that signature, I will be filing a formal complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the comptroller. The currency before I leave this parking lot. Mark paled. He clicked his mouse, opened a scanned document, and hit print. The laser printer in the corner whirred to life. He handed me a warm sheet of paper. It was a standard request form, dated 2 days ago, and there, at the bottom, was my name, Sandra Bexley. I stared at the ink. It was my name. It was my handwriting, but it was wrong. It was the way I signed my name when I was 18 years old, when I started at Stratford and Vance. My mentor told me my signature was too loopy, too juvenile. She told me to tighten it up, make it sharp and illegible, like a doctor or a CEO. Over the last decade, I had trained my hand to make the B in Bexley a sharp vertical slash with 2 tight humps. The signature on this paper had a B with a large, sweeping bottom loop that crossed back over the stem. It was the signature from my high school diploma. It was the signature from the joint checking account my mother had opened for me before I went to college. She had traced it. She had found an old document, probably from a box in her garage, and practiced until she got it right. But she had practiced the wrong version. This is a forgery, I said, pointing to the loop. That is not my current legal signature. Mark looked at the paper, then at my driver's license, which I had slapped onto the desk. He compared the two. The difference was obvious even to an untrained eye. Okay, he said, his voice dropping an octave. That is concerning. But Ms. Bexley, look at the second page. We wouldn't have processed this on a signature alone. There is an attachment. He handed me the second sheet. It was a general power of attorney. I felt the blood drain from my face. A general power of attorney is the nuclear weapon of legal documents. It grants the agent the ability to do almost anything the principal can do. They can access bank accounts, sell property, sign contracts, and incur debt. This document stated that I, Sandra Bexley, appointed Patricia Bexley as my attorney in fact. It gave her the power to sell, convey, and encumber my real property. I never signed this, I whispered. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold. Calculating horror, the date on the document was from 6 months ago. She had been planning this, or rather, she had forged a date to make it look established. Mark was sweating now. He picked up his phone. I am going to call our risk management officer. Ms. Vance needs to see this, while he dialed. I studied the bottom of the power of attorney. A document like this has to be notarized. A notary public has to verify the identity of the signer, check their ID, and witness the signature. If I wasn't there, the notary was either incompetent or corrupt. I looked at the stamp. It was a standard Washington State notary seal. Gavin Trent. Commission expires. January 2028. I pulled out my phone and typed the name into the search bar. Gavin Trent. No LinkedIn profile. No business website. Just a listing on a generic directory for mobile notaries. Ms. Vance, the branch manager, walked in. She was a woman in her 50s with hair sprayed into a helmet of steel gray. She looked at Mark, then at the papers, then at me. Ms. Bexley, Mark tells me there is a dispute regarding the payoff. It is not a dispute, I said. Standing up, it is a crime. My mother forged my signature on a power of attorney and used it to pay off my mortgage. Presumably so she can sell my house out from under me. I did not sign this. I have not seen my mother in weeks except for a brief visit 3 days ago. Vance picked up the power of attorney. She looked at the notary stamp. We verify these, she said defensively. We call the notary to confirm they witnessed the signing. I challenged, did you call Gavin Trent? Or did you just see the stamp and push the button because the bank was getting a $300,000 influx of cash? Vance pursed her lips. We follow standard procedure. Then your standard procedure just facilitated grand larceny. I said, I want the wire tracking number. I want the full contact information for Redwood Title and Escrow, and I want a written statement from you acknowledging that I have contested this transaction as fraudulent as of this moment. Vance sighed, realizing this was going to be a paperwork nightmare. She nodded to Mark. Give her the information. We will open an internal investigation. I took the papers Mark handed me. I had the name of the title company. I had the name of the notary. Gavin Trent. My mother had always bragged that her new boyfriend knew people. He knew how to get things done. I had assumed he meant he knew how to get a table at a crowded restaurant or get a discount on a used car. Now I realized what she meant. He knew people who could stamp a lie and turn it into a legal truth. I looked at the notary's name one last time. Gavin Trent. He was the weak link. A forger needs a pen, but a scammer needs a notary. He was the gatekeeper who had let the wolves into my life, and I was going to pay him a visit. Ms. Vance sat across from me in the small glass office, her fingers laced together on top of the polished mahogany desk. She looked at the forged power of attorney document as if it were a dead rodent that had been dropped onto her paperwork. Her expression was a practiced mask of corporate concern, but I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was already assessing liability. She was wondering if Stratford and Vance, my employer, banked with them, and how much blowback this would cause. We will place a freeze on the file immediately. Ms. Bexley, she said, her voice tight. We will flag the account for fraud investigation. However, you must understand the mechanics of the situation. The wire transfer has already cleared. The funds are in our general ledger. We cannot simply push a button and send $350,000 back to an originator that might be a shell company. We have to verify the source. I nodded. I understood the mechanics perfectly. In the world of finance, possession is 9/10 of the law, and once money commingles with the bank's operational funds, extracting it is like trying to take the milk out of a latte. But the money was not my primary concern anymore. The money was just the grease for the gears. The machine itself was the document sitting on the desk. I left the bank 10 minutes later with a case number and a headache that was beginning to throb behind my left eye. The rain had intensified, drumming a relentless, chaotic rhythm on the roof of my car. I did not start the engine immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone and tethered my laptop to its hotspot. I needed to know who Gavin Trent was. In my line of work, we have a saying, the devil is not in the details. The devil is in the documentation. A notary public is supposed to be the first line of defense against identity theft. They are the gatekeepers of truth. If a notary stamp is on a document, the law assumes the signature is valid. I logged into the Washington State Department of Licensing database. It is a public record, accessible to anyone who knows where to look. Though most people never bother, I typed in the name, Gavin Trent. The search results populated instantly. He was not a paralegal at a high-rise firm. He was not a bank employee. Gavin Trent was a mobile notary. I clicked on his license history. He had been commissioned 4 years ago. His business address was a post office box in a strip mall in Renton, next to a discount vape shop and a dry cleaner. There were 2 prior complaints lodged against his commission number. Both were for failure to properly log identification in his journal. Minor infractions. Slap on the wrist stuff. The state had not revoked his license, just issued a warning. He was perfect. He was exactly the kind of low-level functionary a con artist would seek out. He was likely the type who charged $50 extra to meet you in a parking lot at 10 at night and did not look too closely at the driver's license you handed him, provided the cash was crisp. I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes for a second. My mother had mentioned that her new boyfriend, Ken, knew people. She said he knew lawyers. She said he had connections. I realize now that Ken's connections were not the kind you find at a country club. They were the kind you find on Craigslist under services offered. Gavin Trent was the weak link in the chain, the man who had turned a forgery into a legal weapon. But why pay off the house? That was the variable that would not balance. If they wanted money, they could have taken out a home equity line of credit. They could have cashed out the equity. Paying off the entire mortgage required capital. It meant they had access to cash up front. I pulled up the contact for my title insurance company. I had purchased an owner's policy when I bought the bungalow 5 years ago. It was one of those expenses that seemed unnecessary at the time. Like travel insurance, but I was risk-averse by nature. I dialed the claims department. After navigating a labyrinth of automated menus, I finally got a human being on the line. I explained the situation briefly: a forged power of attorney, a mortgage payoff I did not authorize. The agent on the other end, a woman with a weary voice, went silent for a moment. "Ms. Bexley," she said slowly, "if that power of attorney is recorded with the county, your mother has the legal authority to act as you in all matters regarding real estate. She does not just have the power to pay off a loan, she has the power to sign a deed." The air in the car suddenly felt very thin. "If the mortgage is paid off," the agent continued, "the title is clear. There is no lien holder to block a sale. There is no bank to demand an inspection or an appraisal. If she has a buyer lined up, she can transfer the property today." I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was not shock. It was rage. Pure, cold, distillated rage. My phone buzzed in my lap. I looked down. It was a text message from my mother. I stared at the screen. The preview showed 2 sentences. "I am doing what is best for you. Do not be ungrateful." I read it twice. I read it 3 times. This was not a mistake. This was not a misunderstanding or a prank gone wrong. This was a confession. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was framing her theft as a favor. She was gaslighting me via SMS text message while she sold my life out from under me. By telling me not to be ungrateful, she was acknowledging that she had taken an action that required gratitude. She was admitting agency. I took a screenshot of the text, then I backed it up to the cloud, then I emailed it to my work account. This was evidence. This was proof of intent. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 11:30 in the morning. If the agent was right, if the goal was to sell the house, they needed to record the deed. In real estate, nothing is real until it is stamped by the county recorder. A signed deed in a drawer is just a piece of paper. A recorded deed is a transfer of ownership. I started the engine. The windshield wipers slashed back and forth, clearing the view of the gray, weeping world outside. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the bank parking lot. cutting off a delivery truck in my haste. I did not care. I was not going back to work. I was not going home. I was going to the county recorder's office, if my mother and her boyfriend were trying to execute a property flip. That is where the paper trail would end, and I intended to be there when the ink was still wet. The county recorder's office was located in the basement of the municipal courthouse, a windowless bunker that smelled of stale toner, floor wax, and the slow, dry decay of a million archived dreams. The air was thick and recycled, humming with the low-frequency drone of server fans and the rhythmic thumping of date stamps. I stood at the counter, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the formica. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a headache-inducing flicker, casting a sickly pallor over the room. I had filled out the request slip with a pen that leaked blue ink onto my thumb. Parcel number, address, owner name. I watched the clerk, a heavy-set woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, type the information into her terminal. Her fingers moved with agonizing slowness. Clack, pause, clack, pause. I felt like I was underwater. The sounds of the office, a cough from the back row, the rustle of maps, the squeak of a shoe on linoleum seemed distorted and far away. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. I kept checking my watch. It was 1:14 in the afternoon. Every second that ticked by felt like a physical subtraction from my life expectancy. The clerk squinted at her screen. She frowned, then tapped the enter key a few times with more force. "You said you are the owner?" she asked, not looking up. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded brittle. "Sandra Bexley." She finally looked at me. Her expression was unreadable, the bureaucratic mask of someone who had seen every variety of property dispute and divorce settlement the city had to offer. "Well, Ms. Bexley," she said, swiveling the monitor slightly away from me as if to protect the data. "There has been some activity on this parcel today, quite a bit of it, actually." My stomach turned over. "What kind of activity?" "A document was recorded this morning," she said. "Timestamp says 902A. Right when we opened." "What document?" I demanded. I leaned over the counter, invading her personal space. I did not care. "A statutory warranty deed," she replied. The world stopped. A warranty deed is the finality of real estate. It is the instrument of transfer. It is the piece of paper that says, "I own this, and now I give it to you." "Show me," I whispered. She printed a copy. The printer chugged and wheezed before spitting out a warm sheet of paper. She slid it across the counter. I looked at it. The room seemed to tilt. At the top, in bold, capitalized letters, "Statutory Warranty Deed. Grantor Sandra Bexley, a single woman, Grantee Vantage Point Holdings, LLC, a Nevada limited liability company," and there, below the legal description of the land that I had mowed, weeded, and paid for with 5 years of my life, was the signature block. "Sandra Bexley, by Patricia Bexley." Her attorney, in fact. The signature was loops and swirls, confident and sweeping. My mother's hand. I dropped my gaze to the excise tax affidavit attached to the back. This was the document that declared the sale price for tax purposes. I looked at the number on line 4, $510,000. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat, a hysterical, jagged thing. My house, my craftsman bungalow in a neighborhood where prices had skyrocketed, was worth $850,000 on a bad day. Zillow estimated it at nearly $900,000. $510,000 was not a sale. It was a butchery. It was 60% of the market value in the auditing world. We call this a fire sale. It is what you do when the asset is distressed, or when the seller is desperate, or in this case, when the seller does not care about the value because every single dollar is pure profit. "This is impossible," I said, my fingers shaking as I pointed to the price. "This house is worth nearly $1 million. Why would I sell it for half price?" The clerk looked at the paper, then at me. Her eyes softened, the bureaucratic steel melting into something resembling pity. That look was worse than the indifference. It was the look you give to a pedestrian who has just been splashed by a bus. "I can't speak to the valuation, ma'am," she said gently. "But the paperwork appears to be in order. The power of attorney was recorded 5 minutes before the deed. It references the same notary." "It's fraud," I said. "My mother forged my signature. She stole my house." The clerk nodded slowly. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small, white business card. She slid it across the formica, placing it on top of the deed. "Economic Crimes Unit," she said. "Detective Miller is the contact. You aren't the first person to come in here with a story like this today. Sadly." I stared at the card. It was real. This was happening. I looked back at the deed. Vantage Point Holdings, LLC. I did the math in my head, the numbers rearranging themselves into a terrifying equation. My mother had used the forged power of attorney to secure a bridge loan, or perhaps the buyer's own cash to pay off my $350,000 mortgage. That cleared the title. Then, immediately, she transferred the property to this shell company for $510,000. The difference was $160,000. That was the spread. That was the heist. She had sold my future, my security, and my home for a quick $160,000 cash out. She didn't care that she had incinerated $300,000 of my equity. She didn't care that she had sold a prime asset for pennies on the dollar. She just wanted the liquid cash. She wanted the fast money to run away with her crypto boyfriend. She had burned down my financial house to light a cigarette. "I need certified copies," I said. My voice was steady now, cold and hard as the granite countertop. "I need certified copies of the power of attorney, the warranty deed, and the excise tax affidavit, and I need the receipt showing who paid the recording fees." The clerk nodded and began typing again. I stood there, waiting, legally, as of 9:02 this morning. I was trespassing. If I went home, I would be entering a property owned by Vantage Point Holdings. See, they could evict me, they could change the locks, but they had made a mistake. They had underestimated the paper trail. They thought that by rushing the recording, by paying off the bank, they had sealed the deal. They thought the speed of the transaction would blind me. I took the stack of certified documents from the clerk. They were heavy, stamped with the official seal of the county. The embossing felt rough under my thumb. I was not just a victim anymore. I was a witness, and I held the murder weapon in my hands. I walked out of the basement, past the security guards, and out into the rain. The water soaked my hair and ran down my neck, but I didn't feel it. All I could feel was the burning heat of the documents pressed against my chest. I was going to find out who Vantage Point Holdings was, and then I was going to burn them to the ground. Legally speaking, my mother wanted a fire sale. I would give her an inferno. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the county courthouse, the engine idling to keep the heater running against the damp chill. The certified documents were on the passenger seat, a stack of paper that weighed next to nothing but carried the mass of my entire life. I opened my laptop again. I had the who, my mother and Gavin Trent. I had the what, a fraudulent conveyance and a theft of equity. Now I needed to understand the entity at the receiving end of this transaction. I typed Vantage Point Holdings, LLC, into the search bar of the Nevada Secretary of State's business portal. Nevada is the Cayman Islands of American Domestic Incorporation. It offers high privacy, low taxes, and a veil of corporate secrecy that is difficult to pierce without a court order. The results populated in seconds. Status active, filing date, 2 years ago. Registered agent, a generic corporate service company in Las Vegas. I dug deeper, switching to a subscription-based background check service I used for vetting vendors at work. I ran the entity name against real estate transaction records. The list that scrolled down my screen was a graveyard of distressed properties. Vantage Point did not buy homes to live in. They bought pre-foreclosures, tax liens, and properties from estates where the heirs were fighting. They were bottom feeders. They were a sophisticated version of those hand-painted signs you see at freeway off-ramps that scream, "We buy ugly houses cash." They were flippers, but aggressive ones. I found a thread on a tenant rights form referencing them. "Vantage Point bought my building," one user wrote. "They didn't even give us 30 days. They used a loophole to claim we were squatters, changed the locks while I was at work. I looked at the address listed for their operations. It was a UPS store in a strip mall in Henderson, Nevada, Box 404, a ghost address for a ghost company. I needed to confirm this was active. I needed to know if there was a human being behind the LLC or just an algorithm. I picked up my phone and dialed the number listed on their latest filing. It rang 3 times. "Vantage?" a man barked. No greeting, no pleasantries, just the name, spoken like a threat. I dropped my voice, adopting the hurried, annoyed tone of a logistics coordinator. "Yeah, hi, this is dispatch for Swift Courier. I have a priority envelope here for a Ms. Bexley at the Seattle address on 4th Avenue. Driver says nobody is answering. Requires a signature." "Bexley isn't the owner," the man said. His voice was gravelly, the sound of a heavy smoker. "We own that property as of this morning." My hand tightened on the steering wheel until the leather creaked. "Okay, well, I have a package for the resident. Is she there?" "She won't be for long." The man laughed, a dry hacking sound. "We have a crew going over there in 48 hours to trash out the place. Tell your driver to toss it or return to sender. The previous owner is vacating. If she is not out by Thursday morning, the sheriff is dragging her out." 48 hours, I repeated, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Got it. I will update the log." I hung up. 48 hours, 2 days. That was the timeline. My mother had not just sold the house. She had agreed to immediate possession. Standard closings take 30 days. Cash deals can take 10. But this was a liquidation. This was a get-out-now clause. I looked at the rain smearing the windshield. I had 48 hours before a crew of strangers arrived to throw my furniture, my clothes, and my memories into a dumpster. I closed my eyes and let the auditor brain take over. I needed to reconstruct the cash flow to understand the motive. Why sell a $900,000 asset for $500,000? It was the speed. My mother did not have the credit to refinance. She didn't have the income to qualify for a home equity line of credit. If she wanted to access the equity in my home, she had to sell it. But selling a house the traditional way takes time. You have to stage it, list it, wait for offers, wait for the buyer's financing, wait for inspections. That takes 60 days. My mother and her crypto boyfriend did not have 60 days. They were running a sprint. Here was the play, the boyfriend, or perhaps a hard money lender he knew, fronted the $353,000 to pay off my mortgage yesterday. That cleared the title. It removed the bank's lien so the property looked clean on paper. Then, immediately, they used the forged power of attorney to sell the clean house to Vantage Point for $510,000 cash. Vantage Point wires the $510,000 to the title company. The title company pays off the boyfriend's $353,000 loan. The remaining balance is roughly $157,000. That was the number. That was the price of my betrayal. My mother was walking away with $157,000 in tax-free cash. She was leaving nearly $400,000 of equity on the table, giving it to Vantage Point as their profit margin, just so she could get her hands on that quick cash today. She had pawned my house. She had treated my life's work like a stolen watch at a pawn shop, accepting pennies on the dollar just to get the money and run. I grabbed my phone and dialed Harrison. He was a real estate attorney I had used once to review a boundary dispute with a neighbor. He was expensive, aggressive, and he hated losing. "Harrison," he answered. "It is Sandra Bexley," I said. "I have a title emergency. A forged deed was recorded this morning. I need to stop the sale." "Recorded?" Harrison's tone shifted instantly from casual to sharp. "If it is recorded, Sandra, the sale isn't happening. It has happened. Title has passed." "I know," I said, "but it is based on a forged power of attorney. I have the proof. The buyer is an LLC called Vantage Point. They told me I have 48 hours to vacate. I need to stop them from flipping it again or taking possession." "Okay, listen to me carefully," Harrison said. "We need to cloud the title immediately. We need to file a lis pendens. A lis pendens, I repeated. I knew the term. Latin for suit pending. It is a public notice filed against a property that tells the world, do not touch this real estate. It is subject to a lawsuit. It effectively freezes the property. No title company will insure a transaction with a lis pendens on the record. Yes, Harrison said, but you can't just walk into the recorder's office and file a lis pendens like you are filing a tax return. It has to be attached to a filed complaint. We have to sue someone, Sandra, today. Sue who? Everyone, Harrison said. We sue your mother for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. We sue the notary for negligence. We sue Vantage Point to quiet the title. We file a complaint for quiet title and declaratory relief. Once the clerk stamps that complaint and gives us a case number, I can record the lis pendens. That will stop Vantage Point dead in their tracks. They won't be able to sell it, refinance it, or even evict you easily because the ownership is in dispute. How much? I asked. Retainer is $5,000, Harrison said. And the filing fees, I can have the draft ready in 2 hours if you get me the documents now. I am sending them, I said. Do it. I want the lis pendens recorded before the courthouse closes today. Sandra, Harrison added, his voice softer. If we do this, it is public record. You are suing your mother. There is no going back to Sunday dinner after this. I looked at the empty passenger seat where my mother used to sit when I drove her to the grocery store. I thought about the text message. Do not be ungrateful. My mother died 3 days ago. Harrison, I said, my voice cold. The woman who signed that deed is just a defendant. File the suit. The precinct smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a scent that seemed to be the universal cologne of bureaucracy. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my posture rigid, clutching the binder I had assembled in the car. It was color-coded. Tab A for the fraudulent power of attorney. Tab B for the unauthorized deed. Tab C for the comparative signature analysis I had done myself, overlaying my current signature with the one from my high school yearbook. Detective Miller looked nothing like the detectives on TV. He was a man in his 50s with a receding hairline and a weary expression that suggested he had heard every lie a human being was capable of inventing. He picked up my binder, flipping through the pages with a skepticism that bordered on boredom. Ms. Bexley, he said, not looking up. You have to understand, 90% of the time, these things are civil disputes. Mom borrows money. Daughter gets mad. They call the cops. We don't referee family arguments. This isn't an argument, detective, I said, my voice steady. It is a felony. It is forgery in the first degree and identity theft. Look at tab D. Miller paused. He flipped to tab D. It was a printout of my Google timeline location history for the date the power of attorney was allegedly signed. The notary log says I appeared before him in Renton at 2 p.m. on August 14th. I explained. As you can see from the GPS data on my phone, which corresponds with my badge swipe records at Stratford and Vance, I was in a compliance meeting in downtown Seattle at exactly that time. Unless I have the ability to bilocate, that notarization is a lie. Miller looked at the map, then back at the notary stamp in tab A. He shifted in his chair. The boredom was gone. In its place was the sharp, focused look of a predator who just caught a scent. And the sale price, he asked, tapping the deed. $510,000, I said. For a property assessed at $850, it is a classic equity skimming operation. She is cashing out the equity to run. Miller closed the binder. He looked at me with a newfound respect. You did my job for me, Ms. Bexley. Most people come in here crying and screaming. You came in with an indictment. I am an auditor, I said. I deal in facts. The fact is, the woman who raised me is trying to steal $300,000 from me. Just then, my phone buzzed on the metal table. The screen lit up Mom. My heart hammered against my ribs. A traitorous physical reaction to the woman who gave me life. Part of me, the part that was 5 years old and scraped my knee, Wanted to answer and hear her say it was all a mistake. But the woman sitting in that chair was 32 years old, and she knew better. "Answer it," Miller whispered, gesturing to the phone. "Put it on speaker." I tapped the green button and laid the phone on the table. "Sandra." Her voice filled the small interrogation room. It was warm, maternal, the voice that used to read me bedtime stories. It made my stomach turn. "I'm here," I said. "Oh, thank God," she said. "I've been so worried. You didn't answer my text. Listen, honey, I know this seems sudden, the house and everything, but you have to trust me. You've always been so bad with money, always stressing about bills. I did this to help you." I looked at Miller. He raised an eyebrow. "You sold my house to help me?" I asked. "I liquidated an asset," she corrected, using a term she must have picked up from her conman boyfriend. "It was too much burden for you. The repairs, the taxes. I'm going to take the profit and invest it for you. But listen, I kept $10,000 cash. I want to give it to you for a deposit on a nice apartment, something modern. You'll love it. $10,000. She was offering me a crumb from the loaf she had stolen from my own pantry. She was trying to buy my silence with my own money. "That is generous of you," I said, my voice flat. "Where are you?" "Mom, we need to sign the papers for the transfer, right?" "Oh, I'm still in Idaho," she lied. "At the retreat, but I can wire the money." In the background, behind her voice, I heard a sound. It was faint, but distinct. A deep, resonant horn blast followed by the clanking of heavy machinery. I looked at Miller. He nodded. He heard it too. "Idaho doesn't have foghorns." "Mom," I said, "that sounded like a fairy." "It's a movie on the TV," she stammered quickly. "Look, honey, don't be difficult. You know how you get. Just let me handle the finances. You just worry about packing. When can you be out?" "I don't know," I said. "The buyer said 48 hours. Thursday is good," she said, her voice tightening. "Thursday is perfect. Just leave the keys on the counter." "Mom," I asked, "are you coming to say goodbye?" There was a silence, a long, heavy silence, where I could practically hear her calculating the risk. "I might send Ken to pick up the keys," she said. "No," I said firmly. "I want to see you. If you are doing this for me, if you are saving me, then come tell me to my face. Come give me the $10,000, or I don't leave." "Sandra, I stay, and I change the locks, and I make this hard," I threatened, channeling the petulant child she thought I was. "I want my mom," she sighed, a sound of theatrical exasperation. "Fine, fine. I'll be there tomorrow morning at 10, with the buyers. We do a walkthrough. You hand over the keys, I give you the cash, and then we are done. Okay." "Okay," I whispered. 10, I hung up. The silence in the room was heavy. Detective Miller leaned forward. "That was textbook gaslighting," he said quietly. "She is trying to make you feel incompetent so you thank her for robbing you." "I know," I said. I felt cold, despite the humidity in the room. "She is in Seattle. That was a Washington State ferry horn. She is probably at a hotel downtown." "We have enough for an arrest warrant based on the forgery," Miller said. "But if we arrest her now, at a hotel, she might claim the money is gone, or the boyfriend might take off with it. We need to catch them together. We need to catch them in the act of finalizing the fraud." "So we wait for tomorrow," I said. "We wait," Miller agreed. "You go home. You act like you are packing. You act like the defeated daughter she expects you to be. Let them come to you. Let them walk into the house thinking they have won. We will be listening." I stood up, gathering my binder. The weight of it felt different now. It wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was a trap. "Detective," I asked, my hand on the doorknob, "does it ever get easier turning on your own family?" Miller looked at me, his eyes sad and tired. "No," he said, "but living with a lie is harder. Go home, Ms. Bexley. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. I walked out of the station into the rain. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. Victims cry. Victims beg. I wasn't going to do either. I was an auditor, and I was about to close the books on this account permanently. Harrison called me at 4:15 in the afternoon. His voice was brisk, the tone of a man who had just won a sprint. "We got it," he said. "The judge signed the temporary restraining order ex parte, as of 10 minutes ago. The title to your property is frozen. The county recorder has been notified. Vantage Point cannot sell, encumber, or transfer that deed until a full hearing is held." I let out a breath I did not realize I'd been holding. The legal firewall was up. "Now," Harrison continued, "do not tell them. If they know the deal is dead, they might not show up. And if they do not show up, you do not get your confrontation. And the detective does not get his catch. Let them walk into the ambush thinking they are kings." I thanked him and hung up. Then, I sat on my couch and stared at my phone. It was time to set the physical trap. I opened the message thread with my mother. Her last text was still there, glowing with toxic benevolence. "Do not be ungrateful," I typed slowly, forcing my fingers to form words of submission. "Mom, I am tired. I cannot fight you on this. You win. I will pack my things. Come get the keys and sign the handover papers." I hit send. The response came in less than 30 seconds. She must have been staring at her screen, waiting for me to break. "That is my sensible girl. We will be there at 10 tomorrow. Have everything ready." I stared at the words, sensible girl. It was the same praise she used to give me when I let her borrow money from my babysitting fund. Money I never saw again. It was the praise of a parasite for a compliant host. I put the phone down and stood up. I had work to do. I did not pack a single box. Instead, I began to clean. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until the granite gleamed. I vacuumed the living room rugs in precise, parallel lines. I polished the hardwood floors until they reflected the recessed lighting like a mirror. I was not cleaning for the new owners. I was not cleaning to be a good tenant. I was cleaning because this was my house. Every swipe of the sponge was a declaration of ownership. I had sanded these floors on my hands and knees 3 years ago. I had installed that backsplash tile by tile, learning how to use a wet saw from YouTube videos because I could not afford a contractor. This house was not just an asset. It was the physical manifestation of my discipline. It was the only thing in my life that I had built solely for myself, and I was going to make sure it looked perfect when I defended it. At 6 o'clock, I drove to an electronics store and bought 3 small home security cameras. They were unobtrusive, looking like small black cubes. I drove back and installed one on top of the refrigerator, hidden behind a decorative vase. It had a perfect view of the kitchen island. I placed another on the bookshelf in the living room, nestled between 2 thick accounting textbooks. The third I placed in the foyer, aimed at the front door. I synced them to my phone and tested the audio. The pickup was crystal clear. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. At 7:30, Detective Miller called. "We are set," he said. "I will have an unmarked sedan parked 2 houses down starting at 9 a.m. I will be in it with a partner. We will be monitoring the audio feed if you can share the link with me." I sent him the access code for the cameras. "Remember," Miller said, his voice serious, "we need them to commit to the act. We need them to assert ownership or try to enforce the eviction. Get them to say it on record. Get them to confirm the money transaction. Once they do that, give the signal." "What is the signal?" I asked. "Open the front door and leave it open," Miller said. "That gives us probable cause to enter due to a disturbance if we need to, but mostly it is just the visual cue. Once that door opens, we move in." I hung up. The stage was set. The actors were cast. Now came the waiting. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark in my living room, watching the rain streak against the windows. The streetlights outside cast long, shifting shadows across the floor. I held a mug of tea that had gone cold hours ago. Usually, when I thought of my mother, I felt a complex knot of guilt and obligation. She was a widow. She had struggled. I had always made excuses for her manic episodes. her bad boyfriends, her financial crisis. I told myself she was just chaotic, not malicious. I told myself she loved me in her own broken way, but tonight, in the silence of the house, she tried to steal. The knot untied itself. I replayed the timeline in my head. She had forged my signature 6 months ago. She had practiced it. She had found a notary who would lie. She had lined up a buyer. She had waited for the market to peak. This was not an impulse. This was not a desperate act of a woman in trouble. This was a premeditated extraction. To her, I was not a daughter. I was a resource. I was a vein of gold she had decided to mine until it was empty. I looked at the kitchen island. On it, I had placed a single, neat stack of papers, the certified copy of the forged power of attorney, the fraudulent deed, the text messages printed out, the bank wire transfer record. It looked like an audit file. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever created. At 3 a.m, I walked through the house, touching the walls. I remembered the winter the furnace broke, and I slept in a parka because I was saving for a new unit. I remembered the summer I spent painting the exterior. My arms aching so bad I could barely lift my coffee cup at work the next day. I remembered the pride I felt when I made that final payment that brought the principal balance under $300,000. She thought she could take this. She thought she could walk in here with a stranger and tell me to leave my sanctuary in 48 hours. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest, replacing the grief. It was a sensation I knew well from my job. It was the feeling of finding the variance, tracking the error to its source, and preparing to write the final report. There is no emotion in an audit finding. There is only the truth and the consequences. I was done being the good daughter. I was done being the safety net. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. My eyes were tired, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them, but the gaze was steady. I brushed my hair and put on my work clothes, a crisp white blouse and black slacks. I did not dress like I was moving. I dressed like I was going to court. I made a fresh pot of coffee. The aroma filled the kitchen, masking the scent of the cleaning products. At 9 o'clock, I saw a gray sedan pull up to the curb 2 houses down. It sat there, engine off, blending perfectly into the rainy morning. Detective Miller was here. I sat at the kitchen island, my hands folded on top of the dossier. I watched the clock on the microwave. 9:58, 9:59, at exactly 10 o'clock. A black luxury SUV turned into my driveway. It was shiny and pretentious, splashing mud onto the pavement I had swept yesterday. My mother was in the passenger seat. I could see her silhouette. She was fixing her hair in the visor mirror. She looked ready for her close-up. I took a sip of black coffee. It was bitter and hot. "Let them come," I whispered to the empty room. I stood up, smoothed the front of my blouse, and waited for the doorbell to ring. The audit was about to begin. The doorbell did not ring. They did not wait for it. I heard the heavy, muffled thud of a luxury car door closing, followed by the click of heels on my wet walkway. I stood by the kitchen island, my hand resting lightly on the stack of evidence, and watched the feed from the foyer camera on my phone screen. The door handle turned. They were trying to walk right in. I had unlocked it 10 minutes ago. As instructed, the door swung open, bringing a gust of damp wind and the smell of expensive, cloying perfume into my sanctuary. My mother, Patricia, led the phalanx. She was wearing a beige trench coat that looked new, and her hair was blown out in a style that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Behind her was Ken, the boyfriend. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny, the kind of synthetic fabric that sparkles under fluorescent lights, and he was chewing gum with an aggressive, open-mouthed rhythm. Flanking them was a man I did not know, but I recognized his type immediately. He was broad, wearing a raincoat over a charcoal suit, with the dead, impatient eyes of a man who evicts families for a living. This was Brock from Vantage Point. I walked out of the kitchen and stood in the archway of the living room. Sandra Patricia cried out, her face arranging itself into a mask of tragic relief. She rushed forward, her arms open, aiming for an embrace that would smother my questions. "You poor thing. I was so worried you would not be here." I took a precise step back. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor I had just polished. I did not say a word. I just looked at her hands, the hands that had forged my name, and then up to her eyes. She froze, her arms dropping awkwardly to her sides. The smile faltered, then hardened. "Okay," she said, her tone shifting instantly from maternal to businesslike. "If you want to be dramatic, be dramatic. We are on a tight schedule." She stepped aside, gesturing to the man in the raincoat. "This is Mr. Brock," she said. "He represents the new owners. And you know Ken." Ken gave me a nod that was half smirk, half nervous tick. He was already looking past me, his eyes scanning my living room, lingering on the flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. I could see him calculating its pawn value. Brock did not smile. He stepped into my personal space, bringing with him the smell of stale tobacco and mints. He did not offer a hand to shake. Instead, he pulled a single sheet of paper from inside his jacket and held it out to me. "Ms. Bexley," he said. His voice was a gravelly baritone, bored and efficient. "This is a voluntary surrender of possession agreement. It states that you acknowledge the transfer of title and agree to vacate the premises without the need for a sheriff's eviction." I took the paper. My hand was steady. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were auditing a file from a branch office in another state. I read the text. It was brutal in its simplicity. It gave me 4 hours. 4 hours to pack up 5 years of my life. 4 hours to vacate or face immediate trespassing charges. 4 hours. I said, looking up at him. "That is not standard. Even in a foreclosure, the bank gives you 30 days. We are not a bank," Brock said, cutting me off. "We are private investors, and this is not a foreclosure. It is a sale. Your representative sold the property with a condition of immediate vacancy. That is why we got the price we did. Now, sign the bottom line so my crew can start the trash out process." Trash out. He called my life trash. I looked at the document again, then at my mother. She was checking her watch. "I have a question regarding the chain of title," I said, keeping my voice loud enough for the microphone hidden in the vase to pick up. Brock rolled his eyes. He looked at Ken and chuckled, a sound like dry leaves crunching. "Here we go. The lawyer act." I ignored him. I turned to Brock. "You represent Vantage Point Holdings, correct? Did your legal department perform due diligence on the power of attorney used to execute this deed?" Brock stepped closer, using his height to try and intimidate me. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Listen, lady," he spat. "We do not need a lecture on due diligence from a disgruntled daughter. The power of attorney is recorded. It is stamped. It is valid. We have a clean title policy ready to go. The notary, Mr. Trent, verified your identity. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with him in civil court after you get your stuff off my property. So you are relying entirely on the word of Gavin Trent." I clarified. "You did not call me. You did not verify the funds. We dealt with your agent," Brock said, jerking a thumb at my mother. "That is how the law works." Patricia stepped forward, her patience snapping. She grabbed the pen from Brock's hand and tried to shove it at me. "Sign the paper." "Sandra," she hissed. "Stop trying to sound smart. It is done. The deal is closed." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had taught me how to tie my shoes, who had sat in the front row at my college graduation. I looked for a shred of guilt, a flicker of hesitation. There was nothing. There was only greed and the frantic need to get back in the car and drive away. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do this?" "Mom, I told you," she said, her voice rising. "I am saving you. You are drowning in this mortgage. You have no life. All you do is work. I liquidating this asset so we can all breathe." "We?" I asked. "Yes, we," she shouted. "Families help each other." I looked at Ken. He was vibrating with energy, probably high on the anticipation of the payout. "The money," I said, $350,000 to pay off the bank, and another $157,000 from Vantage Point. "Where is it?" Patricia straightened her coat. She looked like she had won. "It is in my account," she said smugly. "It cleared this morning, and like I told you, I am going to give you $10,000. That is more than enough for a deposit on a rental. You should be thanking me." I took a deep breath. This was it, the final variance, the closing argument. "So," I said, pitching my voice to be crystal clear, "you admit that you used a power of attorney to sell my house to Vantage Point, and you admit that you, Patricia Bexley, personally received the wire transfer for the proceeds of that sale." Patricia threw her hands up. "Yes," she screamed, her face twisting into a mask of ugly entitlement. "Yes, I sold it. Yes, I took the money. I gave birth to you. I have the right." The silence that followed was absolute. It hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ken stopped chewing his gum. Brock looked at Patricia, then at me, a flicker of unease finally crossing his face. He realized, perhaps a second too late, that people do not usually ask questions that specific unless they already know the answer. "I gave birth to you. I have the right." That was the sentence. That was the confession. I looked at my mother one last time. I did not see a parent. I saw a liability. I saw a bad debt that needed to be written off. I dropped the voluntary surrender agreement onto the floor. It fluttered down, landing on the pristine hardwood. "I am not signing that," I said. Patricia's face turned red. "You ungrateful little brat, Ken. Get her out of here." Ken took a step forward, puffing out his chest. I turned my back on them. I walked calmly over to the front door, grabbed the handle, and pulled it wide open. The rain was coming down harder now, a gray sheet of water washing over the world. I stood in the open doorway, letting the cold air rush in. "What are you doing?" Brock demanded. "Close the damn door." I did not close it. I looked out at the street, toward the gray sedan parked 2 houses down. "It is over, Mom," I said softly. And then, the sirens began. The sirens did not sound like a rescue. They sounded like a reckoning. They cut through the heavy, wet air of the neighborhood, growing louder with every second, a piercing wail that shattered the manufactured silence of my living room. My mother stopped screaming. Her mouth hung open, her eyes darting from me to the open door, the color draining from her face until her expensive foundation looked like a cracked mask of plaster. Ken, the boyfriend, stopped bouncing on the balls of his feet. He looked like a deer that had just realized the headlights were attached to a semi-truck. I did not move. I did not flinch. I reached behind me to the kitchen island and picked up the heavy binder I had prepared. I walked past the voluntary surrender agreement lying on the floor and slammed the binder onto the coffee table. The sound was like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. "I am not signing a handover," I said, my voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. "I am signing an affidavit for your arrest." I flipped the binder open. The first page was the temporary restraining order signed by the judge less than an hour ago. The second was the police report for identity theft. "This is a court order freezing the title to this property," I announced, looking directly at Brock. "And this is proof that the power of attorney you relied on is a forgery. You are not standing in a house you just bought. You are standing in a crime scene." Before Brock could open his mouth to bluster, the open front door was filled with dark uniforms. "Police, show me your hands. Right now." Detective Miller stepped into the foyer, his gun drawn but held low. Behind him, 3 uniformed officers fanned out, their boots heavy and loud on the hardwood floors I had spent all night cleaning. The sudden intrusion of state power into a domestic space is a violent, jarring thing. It sucks the oxygen out of the room. Ken was the first to react. The realization hit him that his crypto fortune was evaporating. He spun around, his shiny suit jacket flaring, and bolted toward the kitchen, aiming for the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. He did not make it 3 steps. An officer emerged from the hallway leading to the garage, blocking his path. He grabbed Ken by the shoulder and slammed him against the wall. The sound of the impact shook the framed photos of my graduation that still hung there. "Patricia, Patricia, do something," Ken yelled, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic squeal as the officer wrestled his hands behind his back. But Patricia could not do anything. She was staring at Detective Miller, who was walking toward her with a pair of steel handcuffs in his hand. "Patricia Bexley," Miller said, his voice flat and practiced. "You are under arrest for forgery in the first degree, identity theft, and grand larceny. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No," my mother shrieked. She backed away, knocking over a side table. The lamp crashed to the floor, the bulb shattering. "No, you cannot do this. This is a misunderstanding. I am her mother, Sandra. Tell them I was managing your finances." I stood by the fireplace, my arms crossed. I watched the scene with the cold detachment of an auditor witnessing a failed compliance check. "I did not authorize this sale," I said to Miller, "and I did not sign that power of attorney." "That is a lie," Patricia screamed. The officer grabbed her wrist. Twisting it behind her back, she let out a howl of rage. Not pain. She looked at me, her eyes bulging with a venom I had never seen before. "You ungrateful, wretched girl, I did this for us. I gave you life. How dare you call the police on your own blood?" The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a ledger finally balancing. Brock, the man from Vantage Point, had backed himself into a corner near the window. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, his face slick with sweat. "Officer, listen," he stammered, his gravelly voice jumping an octave. "We are innocent parties here. We are a bona fide purchaser for value. We relied on notarized documents. If there is a dispute between the mother and daughter, that is civil. We paid good money for this property. We have a recorded deed." Miller turned to Brock. He did not lower his weapon. "You are not a bona fide purchaser," Miller said. "You bought a property for 60% of its market value in a rush transaction with an immediate vacate clause. That meets the legal definition of willful blindness. And now that you have been informed the title is stolen, any attempt to enforce that deed makes you an accessory to fencing stolen goods. But the notary," Brock tried to argue, "the notary is already in custody." Miller cut him off. "We picked up Gavin Trent 20 minutes ago. He gave you up. Mr. Brock, he said your company pays him a $500 bonus for every rush job he stamps without the principal present." Brock went pale. The corporate shield he thought would protect him had just evaporated. "We will be seizing your company's records regarding this transaction." Miller continued, "And if I find one email showing you knew the mother was acting without the daughter's consent, you will be joining her in a cell. For now, get out of this house. This is a crime scene, and you are trespassing." Brock did not argue. He scuttled toward the door, stepping over the shattered lamp, and vanished into the rain without looking back. The officers hauled Ken to his feet. "Check his ID," Miller barked to the uniform holding him. The officer pulled a wallet from Ken's pocket and radioed the dispatch. A moment later, the radio crackled back. "Active warrant out of Oregon." The dispatcher's voice buzzed. "Wire fraud and elder abuse." Miller looked at Ken with disgust. "Elder abuse. You really know how to pick them, don't you?" Ken hung his head as he was marched out the door. He didn't look at my mother. He didn't look at me. He was already figuring out his next con. Then it was just my mother. She was not screaming anymore. She was panting, her hair disheveled, the expensive trench coat twisted around her cuffed wrists. The officer began to lead her toward the door. As she passed me, she stopped. She dug her heels into my hardwood floor. "Sandra," she hissed. Her voice was low, trembling with a dark, concentrated hate. "You will regret this. You chose a house over your mother. You are going to die alone in this place." I looked her in the eye. I saw the manipulation, the narcissism, the years of financial emotional abuse distilled into one human being. I would rather die alone in a house I own. I said quietly, "Than live in a cardboard box with you." The officer shoved her forward. "Get moving." I followed them out onto the porch. The rain was coming down in sheets now, washing away the mud on the driveway. The entire neighborhood had come out. Mrs. Higgins from next door was standing under an umbrella, her hand over her mouth. The couple from across the street were filming with their phones. My mother, the woman who cared more about appearances than anything else in the world, was being paraded before her audience in silver bracelets. The officer pushed her head down to protect it as he guided her into the back of the squad car. She looked up through the rain-streaked window. She locked eyes with me one last time. There was no remorse. There was no tearful apology. There was only the cold, hard stare of a predator who is angry they got caught in the trap. I stood in the doorway, the wind blowing the rain onto my face, mixing with the dampness on my skin. I waited until the squad car pulled away, its lights flashing red and blue against the gray sky. I waited until the sirens faded into the distance. I did not cry. Auditors do not cry when they close a file. We just sign off on the work paper and move on. I turned around and walked back into my house. I stepped over the broken glass of the lamp, walked to the kitchen, and picked up the voluntary surrender agreement. I crumpled it into a tight ball and threw it into the trash can. Then, I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. I was home, in the world of forensic accounting. Every transaction eventually has a reconciliation point. For my mother, that point arrived in a fluorescent-lit courtroom. 3 months after she tried to sell my life out from under me, the district attorney offered her a plea deal. If she admitted to the fraud and expressed remorse, they would have recommended a lighter sentence, perhaps 2 years with time served. But a narcissist cannot plead guilty because a narcissist does not believe they are capable of doing wrong. Patricia rejected the deal. She stood before the judge, a woman who had aged 10 years in 3 months of county jail, and she did not apologize. Instead, she doubled down on the narrative she had invented. She told the court that I was mentally unstable, that I was drowning in debt, and that she had acted as a benevolent matriarch to save me from my own incompetence. She looked at me, sitting in the gallery with my hands folded in my lap, and pointed a shaking finger. She called me an ungrateful child who had weaponized the legal system against the woman who gave me birth. The jury did not see a benevolent matriarch. They saw the bank records I had provided. They saw the text messages where she tried to bribe me with $10,000 of my own stolen equity. They saw the video footage from my hidden camera where she screamed that she had the right to sell my property because she had birthed me. The verdict took less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: forgery in the first degree, identity theft, money laundering. The judge was not amused by her lack of remorse. He sentenced her to 8 years in a state penitentiary. As the bailiffs led her away, she did not look at me. She looked at the floor, muttering about how the world had conspired against her. I felt a heavy, dull ache in my chest, the phantom pain of an amputation. But I did not look away. I had audited this relationship, and I had finally written it off as a total loss. The accomplices fell like dominoes. Gavin Trent, the notary who had sold his integrity for a few $100s, folded immediately. He testified against Vantage Point and my mother in exchange for leniency. He was stripped of his notary commission permanently, fined heavily, and placed on 5 years of probation. He will never stamp another document for the rest of his life. Ken, the boyfriend, did not even make it to trial in our state. He was extradited to Oregon to face a laundry list of prior fraud charges. The last I heard, he was trying to negotiate a deal by giving up information on a cryptocurrency scam he had run 2 years prior. He was a career criminal, and I was just a blip on his rap sheet. But the legal victory was only half the battle. The house itself, my craftsman bungalow, was still wounded. The court declared the warranty deed to Vantage Point void ab initio, meaning it was invalid from the start. Legally, the title was returned to me, but in the real world of property law, you cannot just tear up a piece of paper and pretend it never happened. The fraudulent recording had created a cloud on the title. It was a dark mark on the property's history that terrified insurers and future lenders. It took me 6 months to scrub the record clean. I spent $12,000 on attorney fees to file a quiet title action, ensuring that Vantage Point had no lingering claim. I had to pay for a forensic audit of the escrow account to ensure every penny of the unauthorized payoff was returned to the original lender, reinstating my mortgage exactly as it had been before the fraud. I also went on the offensive. I sued Vantage Point Holdings for civil damages. They tried to settle quickly, terrified that a public trial would expose their predatory business model. We settled out of court. They paid my $12,000 in legal fees and an additional $50,000 for emotional distress and punitive damages. It was not a lottery win, but it was enough to replenish my savings and pay down a chunk of the principal on the mortgage I had fought so hard to keep. I used a portion of that settlement money to fortify my position. I hired a locksmith to replace every single lock on the property with high security, pick-resistant cylinders. I upgraded the hasty camera system I had bought that frantic night to a professional-grade security network with off-site cloud storage. I signed up for a lifetime subscription to the most aggressive identity theft monitoring service available. Now, if anyone even checks my credit score, my phone alerts me within 30 seconds. I still live here. Some people asked me why I didn't sell it. They asked how I could sleep in a house that had been the stage for such a traumatic betrayal. They said the place must be haunted by the memory of my mother standing in the doorway, claiming ownership of my life. But that is exactly why I stayed. If I had sold the house, if I had packed up and moved to a condo in the city, it would have been a retreat. It would have been an admission that the violation was too great to bear. Staying was an act of defiance. Every time I mow the lawn, every time I pay the mortgage bill with my own honest money, every time I polish the hardwood floors, I am reclaiming my territory. This house is not just wood and siding, it is my fortress. It is the physical proof of my competence and my independence. I am sitting by the front window now. It is raining again. That familiar, relentless Seattle drizzle that washes the world in gray. I have a cup of hot coffee in my hands, and the house is quiet. It is a good quiet. It is the silence of a ledger that balances perfectly to the penny. I look down at the papers on my desk. I am refinancing the loan to a lower rate. Using the improved equity position, I have to sign a stack of documents. I pick up my pen and look at the signature line. I sign my name, Sandra Bexley. I make the B sharp and vertical, with two tight, efficient humps. It is the signature of a professional. It is the signature of a woman who knows exactly who she is and what she owns. I lost a mother in this process. That is a debt that will never be repaid, a variance that will always remain on the books of my heart. But I kept my dignity. I kept my home. And as I watched the rain fall on the garden, I planted. I realized that the sweetest revenge is not screaming in a courtroom or seeing someone in handcuffs. The sweetest revenge is sitting in your own chair, in your own house, drinking your own coffee, knowing that you are safe because you were smart enough to save yourself. Thank you so much for listening to my story on the Blue Payback channel. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on the case. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need to hear it.